Welcome, system thinkers. You're watching The Question. I'm your host, Ben Callahan, and each week I invite a new co-host to join us and help facilitate a deep dive into design systems. This episode of The Question is sponsored by Zeroheight and Sparkbox, and we're so glad you're here. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join me for this episode's deep dive. My name is Ben Callahan. I'm a design system researcher, writer, speaker, coach, and consultant. But most of all, I'm a curious guy. And that's precisely what led me to create The Question. Every week, a new co-host and I will ask you a few questions about a very specific design system-related topic. You'll have 48 hours to answer, and everyone who does is invited to join the deep dive. Each week is kind of like a mini research project on a very niche design system topic. This only works if we all stay in learning mode. Before I introduce my co-host for this week, I just want to say a big thank you to Zeroheight and Sparkbox for sponsoring this episode. Zeroheight is the end-to-end design system management platform, the place your team can document, deliver, measure, and evolve your design system. Book a demo or learn more at zeroheight.com. Sparkbox partners with complex organizations to create user-driven digital experiences, including world-class design systems. Learn more at sparkbox.com/thequestion. This week, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Ness Grixti, to dive into the ways we can improve design system contribution. She's the design lead for design systems at Wise, the author of A Practical Guide to Design System Components, and she's the founder of Redesigning Design Systems. Let's jump in. So Ness, you wrote this amazing article about design system contribution that I read a few weeks back, maybe a few months at this point. And I read it and it really kind of challenged the way that I was thinking about contribution. So I wrote a comment on there and then I kind of like stuck with me and I kept thinking about it. And lots of folks, I think that article resonated with a lot of folks. Can you kind of set us up for the day? Because you're the one that really drove what we're asking today. Will you just kind of give us a high level?
Yeah. For sure. I mean, I was quite for context, I was actually a bit scared to post that because I feel like contribution has always been treated as almost like a staple standard practice in design systems, which is designed to speed up design system development. But I personally always found that every contribution I've ever had to deal with has required so much hand-holding that it almost negates the benefits that it's sold on to begin with. So, and it also doesn't take into consideration what your actual business needs are for contribution. So to give a bit of context, I started thinking about this a lot more recently because we had a detailed documented contribution process at Wise, which nobody really followed. So we actually had a ticket to fix contribution, which was in the backlog. And I'm afraid to say, I think it's been in the backlog for about 2 years now.
Is that what it said? Just fix contribution?
I'm pretty sure it just said fix contribution. And we've had people try and fix it and went through detailed process to try and fix it. But they ended up with processes that were just as convoluted. So after I released a practical guide to design system components, I thought, right, I'm going to try and fix this. I'm going to create a lean contribution proposal process. And, you know, it's going to make it a lot easier. But when I actually looked at the process itself, it actually really dawned on me just how much work was involved that we do in a design system, which I don't think is a surprise to any of us. But for one, our product teams at Wise, they don't have the time to do this kind of work. And for two, realistically, the skills on a design system team are slightly more nuanced. And that would take a non-systems person quite a bit longer to do this work without support. And our design system team at Wise can't support, and I want to say we have about 90 product teams at Wise. So we don't have that kind of time to support 90 product teams at once working on contributions because it's not sustainable. So when I started thinking about this, I took a massive step back and I really thought about what the purpose of contribution actually was. And more importantly, what does it mean in the context of the problem that I was trying to solve for at Wise, rather than just treating it as a general process as it's kind of labeled. And what I found was our biggest problem at Wise, which is probably evident, is that we have 90 product teams. So it's actually really hard for us to keep up with what our teams actually need from us across the business. And so for us, contribution doesn't mean grow the system as fast as possible. It means get insights on what product teams want us to work on so that we can evolve in a meaningful way that scales. And in that use case, rather than asking teams to do the work for us, given we have the resources, and I completely appreciate that not a lot of teams have these kind of resources, but in our instance, could we not use those insights and actually pair with product teams instead, which in turn would speed up our processes and evolve our systems sustainably, rather than landing in severe tech and design debt by getting contributions from potentially 90 teams? So, I mean, I chose this question, and obviously I wrote this article because I was really, really curious to get insights on how others have thought about this particular problem, and how others think about it in their unique business cases, rather than like, well, there's one way to do contribution, where I think the reality is it's a spectrum, right? Based on what you need.
That idea that contribution is maybe more empathy building and engagement than it is actual like productivity, in some capacity, I think that resonates for sure. So that all of that context that Ness is giving kind of led us down this path of a question that basically talks about the distinction between minor and major contributions, and then asks, how many major contributions do you receive each month? And then kind of challenges you to sort of maybe reimagine how contribution works in a way that's maybe a little bit more lean, that actually accomplishes the goals you want. So the quantitative question we asked led to this response, which I'm kind of highlighting here in the Fig Jam. And what I saw in this is that over 60% of you said you get 2 or less a month, right, of these major contributions. So that's a huge chunk of folks that are basically saying, like, we're not getting a lot, we're not doing much with this. There were, of course, a few teams that had much higher, but these are like 1 and 2, responses basically. So that's sort of context, we've got, I went through again and kind of pulled out some interesting, there were lots of ideas, and Ness, I know you read through all of this as well. And, if you scroll up a little, we asked AI to summarize again for us, just since there was so much content, so that's an interesting kind of read if you want to start with that. But I'll give you all just a moment or two to read through some of this stuff and maybe call out a few. And Ness, if there are things you want to call out here, that's great as well. Anybody see anything in some of these summary responses they want to call out? Or Ness, did you see anything in here in particular?
Oh, I was just going to say, like, one thing that I found really interesting that came out in a couple of responses, and I think it was maybe 2 people who were getting contributions, was around how contributions really work when it comes from leadership, right? So I think it was at the top here, where it was 2 sides of the coin, where design, their head of design was actively encouraging as part of performance reviews to ensure that like designers were actually contributing. Whereas on the flip side, it actually worked negatively for engineers to contribute to the design system. So that I found really, really interesting, that like when you build contribution in from a leadership level, that has a really strong impact on the the amount of contributions you're actually getting.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's so hard to read this, right? Like the idea that if an engineer takes time out of their product work to actually help build something that's going to benefit the entire product organization, they're penalized for it on their individual performance review. I mean, that like the incentive system there is broken, So that's like a really hard thing to read. But thoughts on this, anyone? Or
yeah, this is me. I think maybe it's just in my experience working at a couple different organizations, it has always seemed that kind of designers' time is valued a lot differently than engineer time. Designer time, I think there's kind of an understanding that there's a lot of discovery and it's not so linear. In this organization, like engineering time is like very heavily regimented, like kind of teams are kind of like feature factories. So it's much more of like a larger organization culture shift that I'm needing to advocate for, in terms of like, we're getting really big now. We should have much more engineering and cross collaborations, that we're not like reinventing the wheel on every team. So I think kind of in that way, like these design system contributions are kind of like a microism of like the problems that the whole platform team experiences. And so I've been working a lot like with other like more back of the stack platform teams to figure out like how we drive that culture shift kind of like from like the whole platform organization.
I mean, the word culture shift is what comes to mind when I read that that challenge. It's like that's a bigger problem than just somebody who's working on a design system can necessarily solve. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Other thoughts here?
Hey Ben, this is Jeff. I just wanted to follow up on something that Ness mentioned, which was that contributions are sometimes perceived as speeding things up. However, in practice, they many times will slow things down. In my experience, it's been the latter. And I think it's important to recognize, like just looking at, for example, at engineering, first, product engineers and design system engineers are completely separate orbits, right? Product moves way faster. Design systems teams move much slower. Josh Clark has a great article that talks about that in much more detail. So asking a product engineer to contribute to the design system is asking a few things. It's one, familiarizing with the workflow that the design system team uses. And in addition to that, maybe I'm a product engineer working in Angular or React, and the design system team is using web components. So it's like, I'm going to be asked to learn a completely new technology and familiarize with this entire workflow and still deliver on my product stuff. So I think it's important to, empathize, put yourself in the shoes of some of the individuals who are asking to contribute. The analogy that I like the most is something that Dan Mall talks about, which is he likes to cook, but he doesn't like to clean. And his wife loves to clean, but she hates to cook. And so what ends up happening, he'll cook a lot more if he knows that they're going to partner together and she's going to clean up after. And he uses that as an analogy for product, where it's like, let product folks do what they do best, which is innovate and create, an experiment, but have the design system team do what they do best, which is curate and abstract and make sure that it's going to work best for everybody.
I love that. Guy, you have a continuation there?
I do. Yeah. I just want to add to what Jeff just said, and again, bring back the M word, mindset change. It is, I've seen that as like, once we've abandoned even the notion of, contributions are going to accelerate the delivery of stuff from the design system, there's also an issue of, especially within a large enterprise where I am, for example, we really have to fight that mindset of, well, why do I need to contribute something that's going to help others? Like I'm doing my work. Why do I need to do your work, design system team, for you? And a lot of time that we're really fighting that mindset. And why would it be of value for you to do something that not only benefits your slice of the world?
I mean, this is really interesting because I know Amy Hoop has a really great talk on why your design system contribution process is doomed to fail. And essentially she talks about having that, you need to have a mindset change in the entire business in order for that to work. And you need to make people feel empowered to even want to contribute, right? So it's quite interesting. How do you get to that point where you're making people feel empowered? And I mean, you kind of have to have that in you a little bit to do that as well, right? Oh, Noelle, please go on.
Yeah, this is kind of an adjacent thought. It's another mindset that I've found is interesting within a larger organization. And that is just the mindset from product teams that they may not have the expertise to approach the design system. So there is that like intimidation factor almost. And also it's warranted because we've pitched our design system as this really well-crafted, like almost untouchable thing. And that's how we're selling it to leadership. So to then have product teams adopt it, but that has the repercussion sometimes of people feeling like they may not be suited to contribute.
Wow. Yeah. That one is like, man, that's like a double-edged sword, right? It's because we want our systems to be the highest bar of quality, right? We want to distribute to the org all the great thinking and great patterns and all of that. But then that is a high bar for folks to contribute back to. Yeah. How have you, Noelle, how have you addressed that?
I don't know if we really have. I think we are kind of fighting with that still. We actually were talking about it today, so this is timely. We have like a new area of work that's really experimental, like more in the AI space. And so that's actually been a good opportunity to kind of talk about it, to say, hey, we're a design system team. We aren't AI engineers at this point. How do we actually partner with our AI experts that are on real project teams to actually maybe think about standardizing some of the things that they're doing. So I think that's actually really new. It's really fresh. We don't really know how we're going to do that yet, but I don't know. It does seem like an easy out. It doesn't really affect maybe the core system, but some of the more experimental work. But I'd love to hear from others if other people have found ways to kind of combat that issue.
I haven't got a tried and tested solution, but what I'm trying with is I read Josh Clark's article the other week about shift faster by building a design system slower. And I'll put the link in the chat if you've not read it. But the whole point was the different pace layers, and the design system moves slower than anybody else. You then have your recipe teams, your community teams, and then you have your product teams who are moving super fast around the outside. And the way that I interpreted that is the standards that we have at the design system are the highest standards that we have towards components. And as you go out, those standards decrease because you have to make compromises to go faster. And so the way I see these community people, contributors, is their standards are lower. And that's okay. I mean, I work in accessibility. I make sure our standards are super high. We're going above WCAG 2.1 performance, trying to get really inclusive stuff. I don't expect people contributing to do that. I expect them to get the minimum standard, our WCAG 2.1. If they can do that, I can work later on in my time dedicated to this stuff to improve it. And so if we can get something that's half decent, we can work out the rest. And I think I've been trying to communicate that to contributors and say, hey, it doesn't need to be the best of the best. If I know what you want to do, how you're going to do it, and all the basics that we need when we're trying to build a component in, we can do the magic later. And so that's what I'm trying, and we'll see if that works.
Yeah. So some of the things that we've tried to do to get people to adopt more, which we're struggling with adoption within our organization. But I believe last week I used the analogy, and maybe I didn't, maybe this was a different conversation, but I tried to set expectations of what we are as design system people within the organization, and trying to very clearly say that, when it comes to it, we're kind of looking at ourselves as more like librarians to properly take your content and put it in a place where people can go and find it easily. And yeah, maybe we'll come in and go through an editor role and say that, maybe we need to tweak this comment or add this line here or make sure we're connecting things to these other components or whatever, but really trying to put the contributors in a position of empowerment by saying, you're the subject matter expert in this specific field. I don't have the context of where this lives within the product or the specific use case that this thing has since came from. So it would be really good if you could be the person to author this content, and then we can help you get it into a position. And a lot of the times, I think I have this conversation with Ben, is that contributions are never easy enough, right? So there's always this negotiation and compromising of complexity within the process, of where, as a design system designer, you're either putting the expectations of the work onto the contributor, or you're taking the expectations and putting them on the design system team. And what we've actually started to do within Grafana is taking those expectations and shifting them off of the contributors, to where I'm just trying to get people to get the content out of Slack, just get it out of there and put it in a single place where we can iterate and have conversations and discussions around it in a place that's tangible, and we can improve and migrate it out of Slack. And Slack workflows has been something that's been beneficial for us, is just getting those ideas out of there. But that is taking in more of the burden on us design systems people to be able to manage all of that complexity. But I guess in short, trying to shift the focus of the design systems, this big thing when people are too scared to put stuff into, and try to make it more approachable as them being the experts and having the voice of what they know is best, and help them take their voice and draft and compile the documentation that way.
Yeah, this gets back to the spectrum that we sort of discovered as a group in one of our early calls around the skill sets necessary to do system design versus doing product design. And we need both, right? Like that's, I think, what I hear us saying. And the culture shift is like a recognition that we're moving away from just these isolated disciplines that have their own silo of expertise and recognizing we're actually on the same team. We got to reach across those a little bit. Guy or Ness, do you have a continuation?
Yeah, so I want to continue a bit of what Staten and Daniel said about the level of quality. And I think this is where we're actually running into, we need to find a good balance, because we do have in our design org, we have contributions tied to performance. So it is encouraged, it is incentivized. So we have, 10 or more people who all want to contribute stuff, but we haven't found a good process yet that we can scale that, because we do need to, and I agree with what Staten just said about, they're the ones who know best about the product needs and what their customers need to do with it. We are sort of the guardians of the quality of structure, the how to build it, because we have both design and engineering aspects within our design system. So we need to ensure that, we cover it with our UX engineers and our software engineers and all those things. And we haven't found really the sweet spot of how do we make a process that is not too daunting for the contributor, but also doesn't mean that we need to spend 90% of our time reviewing and working with the contributor to sort of bring the level of that structural quality up. I'd love to hear recommendations from other people if they have.
I don't have a recommendation, but I do have a continuation, just sorry to say. But I completely agree with both of your points, just in terms of that barrier to entry always feels a little bit too high with design systems. Because, it's something that, and this is slightly unrelated, but so many design systems are named after space-related things. And it only annoys me because space and anything spacey makes me think of rocket science. And that almost has this really negative connotation of being like very precise and like very detailed. And you have to be a mathematician to know exactly what you're doing. And that leads to this like really weird kind of divide between, what people feel as though they can actually contribute to. And I'm not saying that I don't have any answers on this, but one thing that we do at Wise is, and one thing that I'm trying to do really heavily now with this new process that I've put in place is, like, for one, just to comment on Staten's an original comment, Slack is where messages go to die, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm trying to pull, we have workflows, but they've got so many negative connotations now because we didn't have a proper process in place. So people are putting in requests or suggesting things and they just disappear, right? So just a note on that is something that we're trying to pull out of. But another thing is that I've been trying to do quite heavily is make sure that I'm communicating with these teams individually and having chats with as many people. Obviously, there's a lot of people at Wise, just trying to talk to as many people as possible to make them feel comfortable to talk to me and feel comfortable to approach the design system team. And it's not that, we're this rocket science NASA in the corner, building rocket ships and making this precise system for everyone to use. But actually, we're here for product teams. And product teams should be doing what they do best. They should be building, measuring, and learning. And at that point in time, then you should be contributing back, right? Yeah.
Hey, everybody, there's still a lot of great content left in this episode, but let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors.
How much time are you spending wrangling all the aspects of your design system? Trying to create a unified experience with your UI libraries, your code resources, your design tokens? You need a platform that makes managing a design system easier, not a chore. So zeroheight is the design system management platform that centralizes everything, including your documentation. And this year, we've rolled out some game-changing features that make zeroheight even more powerful. First up, we have the adoption tab, which gives you real-time insights into how your design system is actually being used. So you can hook it up directly to your code repos and NPM packages, and it will not only make sure that everyone is using your latest packages, but it'll also give you insights into component usage as well. Finally, you can prove real design system ROI. And then there's our brand new API as well. In a few minutes, you can create your own Figma plugin or API chatbot to bring your documentation to the places that your team is actually searching for it. If you're looking to make design system management seamless and efficient, what are you waiting for? Try zeroheight for free today by heading to zeroheight.com and use the offer code QUESTION to get a free 90-day trial. That's zeroheight.com and the offer code is QUESTION. Enjoy the show.
For the last 16 years, Ben and I have both been business partners and friends in our company Sparkbox, which is always aimed to build a better web. In the beginning, that was two software engineers coming together believing there was a better way to do things. What Sparkbox evolved into is a complete team that includes user experience, design, engineering, and plenty of consulting and strategy. About 10 years ago, we dove headfirst into design systems, helping some of the world's largest companies and universities and even tons of small businesses to help realize the efficiency and promise of what design systems can bring. I continue to be in awe of what Ben learns and shares in this community. If you need strategic or tactical help with your design system, swing by sparkbox.com and reach out. We'd love to partner with you and your team. Have a great day. Enjoy the show.
And there were some interesting ideas, right, in the stories that you all told. Like, so there was one concept that I think came through in a few different ways. One was this sort of these three tiers, right? So the top tier in this model, the person shared, the top tier is this full-blown system. It's kind of what we think of when we think of a design system. There's a middle tier, which is like an extension of that has product-specific stuff in it. And then there's this bottom tier, which they said it's like a shared playground where there's no guidelines. So it's just a place for people, product folks, to kind of play, dump stuff, put ideas. I love this because I could see that being a real source of innovation in the system, right? Things start in this playground area. When we see something that really is cool, we could iterate on that, evolve it into something that might work for a specific product, and then evolve that into something that works for the system as a whole. So I love that concept. Does anybody have something like that set up? It's not extremely different from this component registry idea, right? Where there's a place where folks can kind of like put stuff, and then as others, can search that and find it. And then when they see things that are being reused, we maybe elevate that. But anybody have something like that working or aspiring to?
Yeah, we're in the middle of trying to set up a sort of community library of contributions. Sorry, I got a baby on the lap again. And so the idea is like, at first it's just the stuff that is the derivatives of the system that people make. So we noticed that people are already sharing stuff that they make out in the system amongst each other. And much better that they do that in a place where we have visibility, where we're able to amplify it if it's good, where we're able to moderate it if there are improvements we'd actually suggest in it. And so we're trying to put a little governance into play on that. And interestingly, the other design system and the other part of the business had been previously doing this, but it was in a bit more of a sort of Wild West sort of state, unregulated state. And they're now in the process of trying to stand that down and just kind of use it as a backlog of stuff to get into the core system, but then not, to then mothball that space. So we're almost moving in different directions, but maybe the spin we put on it might be more successful. I don't know. Have other teams experimented with that kind of thing?
Erin, is that something you all are doing as well?
Yeah, we started off with a bit of a Wild West file and we do have a space theme, so guilty. But we had a launch pad, and it was a place that we asked folks to sort of drop their designs as they were in progress, so we could see alignment, see how popular things were, and then hopefully elevate them to the system. We probably did that too early in our system evolution. We just weren't able to spend the time with it and with the folks who contributed to it. But I was the one who added this component registry. We are trying to beef up our team a bit. And so we have proposed to our leadership that we should create sort of this registry so we can create a space for just visibility, findability. We can understand how many people are using these things. We had a lot of our what we call local systems, which are more like product teams, asking to see what other people were doing so they didn't have to recreate the wheel, which was like great that they finally came to this place a couple of years ago. They were like, I want to make my own thing. So with the evolution of the teams, like I think our hypothesis is that this could really help sort of like remove that barrier to entry, make it feel a little less scary. Again, the intake form sort of puts it on us to really like review things before they go anywhere, whereas this lets people like put it up without like, again, us sort of like governing heavily.
And it takes away that like fear of it has to be perfect, because it's not necessarily going into the system at this point. That's cool. Jeff, what's up?
Yeah, so we did not have anything in the form of separate tiers. I think as you scale and get closer to like enterprise, that's where the concept of tiers becomes more relevant. But I think this question is so hard to answer because it really depends on the feature workflow that the design system team has established. And in my experience, that becomes the contribution workflow. And I think one effective way to help people understand it is to publish it on your doc site. And then I think the most important piece there is making it as clear as possible that contributing teams are not responsible for the entirety, soup to nuts, right? And so teams can come to the system team with a proposed contribution and say, I'm available for, I've done some research and I'm available for just the discovery on this component. Or they can come to you and say, I've done some discovery and I can do the design work. And I think I have an engineer who can help me out with that as well. But in the end, right, this is a workflow. It needs to be established internally for the design system team so that contributors can understand what are the steps that the systems team takes. And it really is a conversation. You need to talk to contributing teams. And this is one of the reasons why it takes a little bit longer, is because you actually have to have conversations with people. You have to ask that question, is this thing a snowflake or is it used in 3 or more products or by 3 or more, different product squads? Are you familiar with the concept of design tokens? Are you comfortable using them in your work, right? Like those are all conversations that you have to have.
Guy, or state in continuation or a new topic?
Yeah. Continuing the conversation about a contribution model. So I think we're now in our 3rd iteration of a contribution model for our organization. We still haven't got it right, but I'm very lucky to have a UX researcher working on the design system team, so that she's doing research with designers and with front-end engineers to understand how they work and how they see this. And we're planning to do a couple of things in the new year. One of them is a co-creation workshop with our engineers and with our designers to build a contribution model together with them so that they understand, so we understand better what their expectations are and what they're comfortable with and how it fits into their work. But I also want to give them a glimpse into the things they don't see that are happening behind the scenes in this black box of design system. And the other thing is, I think I got it actually from Amy's talk at Clarity, the idea of having create a service blueprint for contribution so people can see exactly what are the different touch points and what to expect in each way, because it is really becoming a beast for us and we want to get there as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I love that. Staten, what's going on?
I feel like this has kind of been bumped throughout this conversation, but to kind of share a little bit more transparency, one of the things that I've heard internally from the organization, and I think this translates into why we've seen low contributions and rumors of teams having their own like component libraries where they're just doing their own thing and moving forward, is this fear of like scrutiny and this fear of pretty much like being voluntold that they now own this component or pattern, and now they have this extra responsibility that they have to, grow and nurture and change. And when somebody has an issue with an issue with a component or a pattern, they're the person that has to come in and fix the stuff. And actually there was, and like, this isn't, I don't think this is like ill intentions or like any kind of like negative behavior on our designers or our like developers' parts. It's just kind of coming along with the space, is they have their work to do. And they don't want any more things on their plate than necessary. And that was a conversation that kind of came up Rather organically, but it was a thing of like, well, we don't want to add it because we don't want to own it. And I'm like, you don't have to own it, right? Like, we'll take that burden from you. And then if other people have, insights or any type of familiarity or opinions on the matter, like, we'll have the next best person go and take the stuff. It's not something that an individual owns and curates. It's, from my perspective, something that the organization is responsible for growing. And in fact, that we've tried to position the design system team as, the curators of the system and the process, but the people that grow and expand the design system are the contributors and the designers and the managers and the developers and everybody else. But like, into that, right, this whole idea of culture has popped up a lot. And I think so much of this falls within a culture shift. And so much so that we've heard that developers don't want to contribute back to the design system because that is not where they're incentivized. Their main, review process and, any kind of, career development is all stemmed from sending out PRs and making sure that they're delivering on features and all this stuff. And the design system and putting things back for people to reuse is not part of that process at all. And I feel like that's one of the biggest hurdles that we've experienced in trying to get more people to use it, is just changing culture, right?
Yeah. Noelle, continuation there?
Yeah, this is kind of I love that take because it's in the corporate setting, and that's kind of what I'm working with currently. I also wanted to point out that I think that this is really where small teams shine, when product teams and design systems team might be one and the same, because you decide what you want to maintain, you decide what's working for you and how you want to grow and things like that. So like, I remember that being a really exciting part of being at a startup that was starting our design system at the same time as really shipping a lot of features in our project or in our product. And yeah, I don't know, it just made that a lot easier. And I'm wondering like what things to learn from that smaller, tight-knit community that could maybe be applied to that larger, more corporate setting with more people involved.
Yeah, that's great. Ness, go ahead.
I just was going to say, I think there was a really interesting comment on the board that actually, I don't know if it's here, but I remember reading about it. It just in terms of having that set up. So like bringing in the business. Yeah, here we go. Sorry, it's over here. So helping the design system understand customer business needs, right? Like that's essentially having your product teams informing your design system in a way that educates them on what they're working on, why it's important, and the actual business impact, rather than obviously if you're working in a business of 90 plus teams and you've got a design system team, it's a lot trickier to manage compared to, you're a product designer working in a design system where you know what's going on.
Yeah. I think part of that has got me thinking about, if if your product team knows what they want, maintaining it shouldn't be any different than them maintaining their product, right? Like we're talking about not growing their scope of work. Well, if we're doing this correctly, in my mind, at least right now, it's you're maintaining your product, therefore you're maintaining X component that we're sharing with other people. I think we run into maybe some of that when some issues with that if we make their component or whatever it is that we're trying to make reusable too broad for them. So now they're maintaining other people's projects. Whereas like, I wonder if there's some scope conversations around how we still standardize things, but keep it specific.
Anything further on that? If not, I'm going to shift us a little bit here. We're going to do something a little bit different, if that's all right. So Ness gave us a bunch of questions up here. So I'd like to give you a minute or two to just do a quick vote. So if you press the E key in FigJam, it will open up a little stamp kind of thing, and you can just use one stamp, doesn't matter what it is, on anything, any one of these, and we can focus in on that, whichever one gets the most votes. I'll give you just a moment to do that. And while you're doing that, I'll share too, just another thing I recognized in the data was that there were folks on like broadly differing ends of a spectrum of how to approach this, right? Some folks saying things like, just let them do what they need to do and then figure out how that, what the impact of that contribution will have, right? So just let them do anything basically, and then figure out how to bring it in, versus saying there should be a strict minimum standard if the submission is accepted into the system so that very little has to be rebuilt. So that's like, these are two very differing ideas. And it continues to sort of encourage me that like almost every process, including contribution, has to live on a spectrum in the systems work that we do. And I think that comes back to understanding the subculture of the part of the organization you're working with. So some of the teams you interact with may need more of this. They may need a little bit more strict, right? Some of them are going to need a lot more flexibility or handholding. And I think that's one of the challenges of being on a healthy systems team, is knowing how to sort of respond to the folks that you're working with, in a way that's healthy, helps them to kind of do their work too. So, okay, I'm just going to call it because we're getting a lot already on a couple of these. So Ness, why don't you lead this convo? We'll start with this third one in.
Yeah, cool. All right. This is one that I'm very curious to hear other people's thoughts on, because I've definitely experienced this and I also find them randomly and it's terrifying. But have you got a library of unofficial components, whether they be coded or designed, created by other teams, maybe in secret or maybe not quite in secret? And how the hell do you manage it?
I think it's so funny because they're like part of the job is the architect, or I'm sorry, what's it called when you're somebody who digs down to discover, like Indiana Jones? What was that whole
archaeologist?
That's it. Design system archaeologist is what this is, right? It's like you're out discovering all of these other systems that exist. I talked to somebody who had found like 20 different what were called systems throughout their org, just everywhere. But Staten, go for it.
I think the first question is, do you have them? We have a lot, and it's awful. It's, the whole like analogy of herding cats comes to mind, because designers will go and do their own thing, developers will go and do their own thing. And the recent stuff that I've heard is this one specific team of engineers said that the other stuff changes too much. We need our own things to stay stable, so we're just going to do it here, and we don't want to deal with getting stuff put elsewhere. And how do I manage it? I don't. Right? Like that's way outside of scope right now. And there's too many fires around to really like prioritize on them. They have what they need and they're being efficient and effective, but it is counterintuitive to the system. But one thing that I'm trying to do this quarter is starting to have more conversations with EMs and PMs and identifying the teams that might be a bit of a black hole with, if I've seen like not a lot of work being shared from there, not a lot of people raising their hands, is just trying to figure out, how are you all doing with the design system? What are you working on? And just kind of looking at it as more of like a relationship building exercise and like a people management approach to this, to hopefully then build enough trust with them and start, pulling them into the fold of contributing their work over.
Yeah, love that. Guy, what you got?
So a couple of things that are helping us mitigate that. One is we have a design system ambassador program where we have a representative from each design team, and we meet with them once a week. They're the ones actually that are, we set it in place because everyone was siloed and we needed a mechanism so that people can bring in needs and then, I actually need that as well. And we can surface common needs across the design org. So that has been really helpful because we have our public roadmap of these are all the things that we're thinking about, and it gets influenced and reorganized and reprioritized based on what the different ambassadors communicate back to us. So that has been really good. On the engineering side, we don't have something like that yet. We're planning to roll that out as well. But the thing is that so far has helped us with that is that our engineers are extremely good complaining when they need to do something that isn't covered by the design system. So we get to catch that kind of like customization, whether it's necessary or not, as it happens. So that helps us as well. Again, not the best thing to do, but we're able to be there when it happens.
Jeremy? Thanks, Guy.
Yeah, I love this question. I think two things that we have is one is other teams I would consider like even third-party dependencies, part of that, where we have some components that have been extended and only after going through accessibility evaluations have we found problems and then traced it upstream to components that we actually don't even maintain. And so some of those, it's like then we have to slate time to rebuild them ourselves. And then for other efforts, we have components that we use Vue, Haml, Ruby. And so the design system is all in Vue, and so we might have others that try to build something similar to match that, but it matches what they're using in the code. And so we try to keep them in parity as much as possible and extend it. But that's one of the things where often our team just doesn't have capacity to build the other versions for those teams, and so they have to kind of rely on that. So it's like loosely managed. I don't think it's definitely not efficient, but something that we're dealing with.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Amy, what's up?
I've seen an interesting strategy where if you know that a component is going to kind of be temporary, you can kind of ignore it. And so knowing that it does not need to be part of the long memory of a design system lets you kind of be like, yeah, they're weird. Leave them be. But for things you kind of look at and you go, yeah, that should probably be part of the design system. I kind of like to annoy people. So I kind of like to go, yeah, that's really cool. And you get with the designer or the engineer and say, yeah, you're doing a lot of things right. But it'd be really nice if, and then like use the design token, use the other thing, use the server components. And so over time, you kind of annoy them into the fact of like, yeah, maybe that's a good contribution. And then unofficial suddenly becomes sort of official.
I love that. Annoy them into contribution. It's great, Amy. Thank you. Other thoughts on this, or we can try to tackle another? I saw this. There's another 4 votes down here.
Yeah, I added this one right at the end. So I'm very curious on this one. So I kind of led with something that I've always felt about design systems, and that we should never be blockers for product. And if we are, we're doing something very wrong. So when is a contribution? And I've had varying experiences with this at different companies. Is it when the idea is incepted, which is, I'll just say right now, I don't agree with, or is it when it's been proven in product, when it's been built and when it's designed, when it's ready? I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts on when a component is a component that's a contribution, or anything as a contribution.
You all voted on this. Give us your thoughts.
So I'll jump in.
Yeah.
Just because our design system is still somewhat in its infancy. Why can't I say that word? Infancy.
There you go.
We actually use product to determine what components go in our design system. Somewhat similar to how the CSS spec works. So I think we tend to essentially pave the cow path with our design system, and we don't end up blocking product because we're building one thing for one product, and then if another team is like, hey, that would be very valuable, we build that into the system at that point and iterate on it.
I love that. So then you're not like going around saying, hey, what's something you would want in the system? We'll prioritize all of the potential future needs. Instead, you're saying, here's things that multiple products are using. Let's codify that in the system.
I guess that sort of takes the approach of doing an audit of your product when you're starting out in a system too, right? Because you get a really solid idea as to what's needed, and then you start developing those proposal processes afterwards to then feed into that.
We do a really similar thing. And I think it's coming from where the design system started to become like more of a focus from the organization, and more around like starting to prioritize this effort. Is coming after the fact of us having designers building libraries and having successful product and all this stuff, and people starting to like copy and reuse components internally. But we never really had a central location for people to reference and start to pull from, right? So a lot of the design system work at Grafana has been a lot of like retroactive things, in a very similar manner, as being like, we've seen that there's 5 different versions of tables within the product. Let's see if we can pull together some consistencies and put together like an MVP table and start having everybody, it's the whole adage where we're taking 5 tables and we're making a 6th table, and we're trying to direct everybody to use that 6th one and start expanding on it to where it starts to make the other 5 more obsolete, and like building the feature set of that one thing. And it's taken a while. And a lot of that's like design system team driven stuff. So I don't really necessarily say it's like contribution in a sense, because I don't really view like us doing our job internally as people contributing the work. But that's, a very similar approach. And I think it just depends on, as highlighted, the maturity of the system and where it kind of sits within the product space.
And you kind of hinted at something else that we haven't really talked about, because I think the question was so focused around major contributions, but there's all kinds of space for, minor contributions, as little as like fixing typos in a doc site. I see that as a contribution, so lots of other ways to contribute. So I don't want to, discredit all of that. Got about 5 minutes left here. Do we want to try to tackle one more real quick? Yeah, maybe. All right. So will building contribution into individual goals and performance outside of a DS team encourage contribution and adoption? So we talked a little bit about this. Ness, what are you thinking on this one?
I think this is a really interesting one, because I feel as though if it's built into, like, if my lead came to me and I was on a product team, came to me and went, you have to contribute to the design system team to meet your objectives, then like I would be a lot more inclined to support that, right? But that's me as a product designer, which, finds that, which is a bit easy. But I think it was Jeff made a comment very early on, which was engineers don't have that kind of luxury, because if you're working on 2 different tech stacks, then it could be quite difficult, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sheena.
Hey, Ness. Hey, Ben. This is a really interesting one for me, because I've been thinking about it all along. And just for clarity, I'm a program manager, so I'm design ops with the design system. I think when I think about WISE and I think about all of the teams, one of the things I know is that we have a lot of designers and a lot of engineers who are really like evangelists for the design system. Like, we have a lot of designers that really, really care. They're really keen on using it. They want to contribute. But I think that probably the biggest barrier to them contributing is not their will to. It's not because it's linked to their performance. I think it's because we have autonomous teams, and everybody has to consistently, qualify what they're working on, which is tough. I think, like, my major thought on that, and I think Ness would probably agree, I think we'd find it quite easy to get that buy-in from the design org. I think where we would find the biggest barrier is product org. Justifying taking designers off the teams that they work with and them spending the time on making something that aligns with the design system. And it is constant. It's a conversation that has to happen constantly. And I feel like justifying that is probably the biggest struggle there, not the will or the want of designers. I think actually a lot of our designers would love nothing more than to spend a sprint, a quarter working on the design system.
Yeah. If you can't get product involved in prioritizing it, it's almost impossible. So, Guy, what's on your mind?
So kind of continuing what Sheena just said, I think it has to be built into the capacity model of design. So if you're saying we're going to incentivize designers to contribute more because it ties into performance, it increases their impact, however you want to position it, it has to be something that we say, we know that each designer now is going to sort of dedicate 20% of their time for contributions. That means that this is what product can sort of play with the other 80%. So that helps us protect ourselves in a way. And then it's not that we need to beg product to give us the time. We already tell them this is what we can give you because we have those other responsibilities or other commitments.
And that's a form of support, right, from leadership to say, like, we're going to give you a budget. We're also going to allocate time from individuals on product teams to do this with you. So, yeah, that's really all that we have. Thank you all so much. Give us feedback and questions, suggestions if you have them, okay? Good to see you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. That's it for this episode. Thanks again to our sponsors, Zeroheight and Sparkbox, for making this episode possible. And thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to participate live in future episodes of The Question, visit bencallahan.com/thequestion. And as always, stay in learning mode.